BMW Motorcycle Owners of America present the Short Wheelbase Podcast. With members in all 50 states, Canada, and across the globe, the BMW MOA invites you to ride inspired. Learn more about membership benefits, including roadside assistance, tire hazard protection, and more at bmwmoa.org. The Short Wheelbase Podcast is also brought to you by Boxer 2 Valve, supplier of quality OEM and aftermarket parts and specialty tools, and by Air Support BMW, offering premium driveline rebuilding and performance enhancements for your air-cooled BMW.
All right, welcome to the Airhead 247 Short Wheelbase Podcast, which is a shorter form companion video podcast for the much-loved Airhead 247 podcast, hosted by my friend here, Darren. Each episode that we do here will feature Darren and I kind of catching up on our Airhead shenanigans, what we've been up to, what rides we've done, what work we've done. We'll also chat about Darren's Survivor Series bikes that he's putting up on his website. And we'll also be featuring some of the Airhead Misfits bikes that I feature on the Instagram account, Airhead Misfits, right here. So with that, I'll toss it over to Darren for his introduction.
Yeah. Hey, Nick. Good to be with you here. And just want to say, by way of introduction, you and I met on Adventure Rider. We are in distinctly different parts of the country. I'm in Arkansas, you're out in Colorado, but we came together for our love of airheads. And I hear there's a thing called Instagram. I don't know a whole lot about it. Somebody told me I need to get on there. Maybe I'll get around to it here eventually. But you've been a big supporter of the 247 podcast. And so really glad to be here with you and doing this. We also should mention really the impetus for this and the genesis for this is that this program and the Airhead 247 podcast are now part of the BMW MOA content family. So we want to thank Ted Moyer and all the folks at BMW MOA for seeing some value in what we do here with this program and bringing us on board as part of their content family. Our other sponsors, supporters who appreciate what we do, William Plam and the crew at Boxer 2 Valve. And we're also bringing on Air Support BMW as a new sponsor. Folks have probably heard George Thomas. He's up there in Kitchener, Ontario, as a semi-regular guest contributor on the 247 podcast. So we've brought George and Air Support BMW on board as a sponsor as well. And we've got a real exciting project we'll be talking about in the weeks and months ahead that we teamed up with George and Air Support BMW as well. Want to mention here before we get into it, if you're not a member of the MOA, they've got a great free digital one-year membership promotion. A lot of folks who listen to the podcast have taken advantage of that. Basically, you get a free one-year membership to the MOA, and you get this decal, the Airhead 247 decal, and a T-shirt. The thing I want to point out about this, Nick, is it doesn't say podcast anywhere on the sticker because that's a word I hate. So the decal just says Airhead 247. I don't know. I've been in radio so
Fair
long. I've just not gotten used to the word podcast still. All right. So with that out of the way, Nick, one thing we're going to do here in our weekly segments, and it bears to mention this is our first episode here, so we'll be working out the kinks, getting comments from you, seeing what you like, what you don't like, right? But we're going to start out with
please comment, let us know.
Yeah, exactly. We're going to start out with what I'm going to call the garage update, and I've got some updates. So I was changing a tire on the R90S last week, and I'm looking at the rim, and I thought initially I saw some road tar on the rim, which is pretty common, a little black squiggly line. And upon closer inspection and a thumbnail check, I realized there was a crack in the rim right there at the spoke hole and the little hump. Well, Nick, there wasn't one of those. There were four. And they were all sort of in a 12-inch section of the wheel on the same side. And so this was a first for me. I don't know. Have you ever had an experience or anybody you know with a cracked rim?
Not anything that I've known personally. I've seen folks crack some of the snowflake rims, but those have all been Facebook group comments that are people in other countries who I don't know.
Okay. Well,
but certainly not a spoked rim, because it's a spoked rim on that bike, right?
that's right. Yeah, that's exactly right. It was an original Weinman rim on that bike. And it's hard to believe all the years, I've been riding and different bikes I've had, I've never noticed this. So I put a post up on ADV, and Bud Proven, who's on there frequently, as BMW Wrench, and he's got some great credentials as a mechanic. In fact, you can hear an episode with him on the 247 podcast. He chimed in and basically said cracked rims are almost exclusive as far as spoke wheels go, almost exclusive to the Slash 6 series. That apparently was a known problem, and the rim provider, or BMW, ended up changing the metallurgy on that, making the rim a little bit more hardened. So if you've got a Slash 7 or maybe a later Acron spoke wheel, probably not as much of a concern. But if you're a Slash 6 rider and you haven't had a cracked rim, sorry to say, apparently it's a deal. You might have to keep an eye on that. And like I said, this was a deal where I think this probably happened within the last calendar year or two, and I wouldn't have probably noticed it if I wasn't changing the tire. So what I ended up doing, I found a nice rebuilt rim from an eBay seller called Moto Dojo. I think he goes by. I bought some parts from him there before. And so it's a nice Weinman style rim, same measurements. It was rebuilt with a nice low mileage hub, so good chunky teeth on the splines. And as a matter of fact, I just popped that in today. Yeah, just popped that in today. And one thing I wanted to mention is when I'm doing tire changes, oftentimes, especially maybe every other tire change, I'll check out the wheel bearings. Most people don't have to worry about this as much. I think I do, in part because I have a lot of water crossings here. And anecdotally speaking, I've noticed a few friends of mine who are regular rally attenders or have been to rallies here recently. Seems like there's always someone there who's got a rear bearing failure. I've had a front wheel bearing failure on my GS before, but I mentioned that because when I put this new wheel together, I went in, took the bearing cap cover off the, that's going to be the right side of the wheel, and that comes off pretty easily. So you get real good access to that one bearing on that side. Take it out, put some fresh grease in there. That takes care of that side. And then I've got this little deal here I wanted to show everybody. I think this is from CycleWorks. I've had this a while. This pops in the other side, right? And apparently it shoots grease in there. I don't know. I think it does, because when I fill up the hole there, I don't see it just sitting in the hole. So it looks like it's getting in the bearings. At least it gives me a peace of mind. I'm pretty sure it works. Yeah, I'm pretty sure it works. So just a reminder to folks, if you're in the garage, you're changing a tire and you hadn't checked your wheel bearings out in a while, probably not a bad idea to do it. So as I said, this is really more in particular to Slash 6 rims than others. But there you have it. That's my garage update. I got a new wheel, got the tire on, so I'm ready to rock and roll again.
All right. Well, I'm glad you're sharing that, because I'm just starting out on an R90/6 build that I'm planning on doing a lot of off-roading with. So I need to build wheels for it. I have perfectly great hubs that came with the project when I bought it in boxes, and they look great. However, I don't have good rims for it. So I need to make sure that when I buy rims for that they are not those /6 ones that you're alluding to. So appreciate you sharing that, because that'll save me some heartache down the road. As far as what's going on in my garage here, I haven't been doing any crazy work lately. Mostly just been riding my conversion, my R50/2 that has an R a 1970 R75 motor in it. Just been kind of riding it. Got it all put back together last winter and just been enjoying it. However, I do have a awesome set of original enduro bags that go on it that need a little bit of TLC before I trust them holding anything. So I'm hoping in the next week that I can sneak out here into the garage and get those bags cleaned up and mounted, because I'd really love to go do just a quick solo adventure camping trip for myself in the next week or so. But that's really all I have going on in the garage.
Well, let me ask you about that bike. So, and those bags in particular.
Yeah.
Are those did they come with the bike? Are they the same era, same patina and color?
They are, best I can tell, from the same era. They are the black bags. They aren't the Dover white like the bike is. So they don't match exactly, but they are period correct, best I can tell. So they have the tail lights mounted in the bottom of them that you can wire into the bike so that you get the extra lights, which I hope to eventually wire as turn signals, because I don't have turn signals on the bike right now. And living out here just outside of Denver, some turn signals would be much preferred.
Yeah, that's a good idea. And those enduro bags, I mean, getting those mounted up, it's not just a simple proposition as we're used to on the /5 or later bikes where, you pop on the frame and then on goes the Krauser bag or whatever. This is a little bit more involved process.
Yeah, they come with these metal brackets that sit right above the mufflers, which I believe act as heat shields as well. And then there's some tabs that you mount onto the frame itself. And then there's these like spring pins that go in, which based on the look of the pins that I have, I don't know that I'm going to trust them. So I got to try to figure out where I can either source new pins or maybe come up with some kind of bolt-on solution for now. So that way I can at least get out there and enjoy a camping trip.
All right. Well, now we know what the next garage update's going to be. Hopefully it will be the bags installed on your bike.
Yeah, exactly. I'll have to make sure I get a picture so we can share it with everyone.
Perfect. All right. So our next segment here that we're going to do bi-weekly on this program, I should say, is Airhead Misfits, which we mentioned your Instagram account. And then I also have a series I do on the 247 podcast and also on the website, Airhead 247, called Survivor Series. So every other week we'll be featuring a bike that a listener or Instagram subscriber has submitted. And we've got a good one this week, Nick.
Yeah. So like you mentioned, I run Airhead Misfits on Instagram, which you can find me at Airhead Misfits, no spaces or dashes or anything like that. So pretty easy to find me. And really what I've been doing over the past couple of years is soliciting folks out there to submit bikes and the stories behind those bikes. And if you do that, I will post it. I post them on Fridays. Historically, I've done them every Friday. Now with the podcast coming out, I might do them every other Friday just to kind of make my workload a bit lighter. But anybody who submits these bikes, I send out free stickers as a thank you. So if you have a bike and a story that you would like to share, find me on there, send me a direct message, and we will get you all hooked up. And this bike that we're looking at today is by user at Half-Assed.
Great name.
And it's his 1981 R65. Yeah, I love that name. So yeah, it's a 1981 R65. It was his first bike that he's ever purchased, and he bought it when he was 20 years old. And at the time that he purchased the bike was already twice his age. So that's pretty awesome, seeing a younger guy jumping in there and grabbing an old Airhead.
Indeed.
He didn't know the mileage of it at the time because the odometer had quit sometime in the 90s. It served him until an exhaust valve issue forced it into storage during his college years. And then after towing it to his friend's garage, he grabbed a donor bike that provided a new drivetrain minus the transmission and the gas tank.
Mm-hmm.
And then he took it over to Ted Porter, and he worked wonders on the valves, waking it up. Alongside that, he rebuilt the forks. The owner rebuilt the forks, not Ted. Calipers, and put new tires on it. And now he's also done brake lines and master cylinder, and he'd like to reseal the tank. But right now it's his daily rider and sole transportation, which is just awesome. There's someone out there just cruising around day to day on their R5. I love that. But what I love even more is the photo of him and his dad posing with the bike in front of his dad's BMW 2002, which is a car that I hope to own one day. I love those cars. They're gorgeous.
Yeah, isn't that great? That cream colored edition there. That's a real looker.
Yeah, for sure. So big shout out to Have Asked for sending his story and the photos of his bike. Like I said, if you have a story to tell and pictures to share, find me on Instagram and I will get you hooked up with some free stickers and we'll share it on the interwebs.
Yeah, he really did a good job with this bike. I like the fact, you sort of looking over the photos that he sent you, you can sort of see the evolution of the motorcycle during his ownership tenure. And, it's for me, it's fun to hear a guy who's basically his only transportation is a motorcycle. Years ago, that was the case with me. That's, I know, the case with a lot of younger riders sometimes. So kudos, HA, to you for that. And the one thing I wanted to mention here, Nick, was the R65 probably, of all the bikes, really benefits the most from a Siebenrock upgrade. So I've interviewed a few folks on the program who've talked about the Siebenrock bolt-on cylinder upgrades. And basically what they say is the R65 is the one where you really get the most bolt-on horsepower, seat of the pants, noticeable change. You're going from a 650 to 860, and then that bike with the shorter wheelbase, obviously it's a little bit lighter. Then you're putting on, you've got that short piston stroke. That is a real good candidate for that. So maybe that's something he'll do in the future. As I mentioned, I've interviewed a few folks about R65s who've done that change. And I have to admit, it's intrigued me a little bit. I don't know if it's that high up on my acquisition list just yet, but it really sounds like a fun bike to get something like that just dialed in with the big bore and let it rip.
Yeah, I agree. It's always, the R65 has always been a bike that's intrigued me. I don't know. I started out on a 250, and so I've always had this love of low displacement bikes, especially when you can just easily increase that displacement without really changing anything else about the bike. So yeah, that sounds like a lot of fun, and I think I'd be hard pressed to turn one down if I came across a Facebook Marketplace ad for a cheap R.
Gosh, yeah. Don't start looking at the ads anytime soon.
I never stop.
Yeah, you and me both. And
it's an addiction.
It is. I know. We can't help ourselves. And to just button this up on the R65 too, one notable thing about that is I believe that was the last Hans Muth designed bike for BMW. The that and the LS with the little nose fairing and all that kind of stuff. So
the little triangular nose fairing.
Exactly. Yeah, that's a neat throwback. And he went on to design for Suzuki and the Katana, whatever it's called. You can see a lot of the design vernacular carried over to that Suzuki he did. So a great Hans Muth inspired bike. And so again, to half-assed, really like what you're doing there. And thanks for being a part of Airhead Misfits.
Yes, thanks again. So next up, we're going to jump into our longer audio segment from the Airhead 247 podcast. This is kind of how we're going to wrap up every episode as a kind of a throw over to the larger podcast. This week, we have a segment from the podcast episode with Helge Pedersen, originally from Norway. He traveled more than 250,000 miles in 10 years.
Oh, that'd be a hell of a trip right there.
R80 GS. Yeah, that'd be a lot in 10 days. That whole adventure is detailed in his book, 10 Years on Two Wheels. And I know, Darren, you've got a few more notes about his past and his history. And
yeah. Helge, he's a guy a lot of riders have admired from afar, from over the years. I became aware of him not necessarily via the book, but I think it was a random YouTube search one day. I found some older videos from his Globe Riders series. Globe Riders is the tour outfit that he ran. He's since retired. When we did this interview that you'll hear, he was preparing for his last tour. So Helge, I hope now, as he mentioned in the full-length podcast, will be retired, probably doing some canoeing and some traveling by himself for a change. So I know he's really looking forward to that. Helge is a really interesting guy, is a really great conversationalist. There's a lot of great stories. And Nick, I think, we took a little bit of time to listen to this. Essentially what we're doing with this podcast, this version of it, and what you'll hear on this episode is we've sort of boiled it down to strictly the Airhead content. So regular listeners to the full-length podcast know we'll go off on all kinds of different topics and subjects. But what we're trying to do here is just narrowly focus this, boil it down to the Airhead essentials. And that's what we've done with this episode with Helge Pedersen.
So yeah, he talks a little bit about the famed R80 GS that we mentioned him taking around the world for 10 years. He also owned an R100/7 that he did a ton of amazing work to prior to the GS. And he outlines that work and the modifications he's done in the following segments. If you would like to hear the full episode, you can find that on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and SoundCloud, as well as I'll throw a link below so that you can get right to it and listen to the whole thing if you'd like. But for right now, we'll just jump right over to the segment. I hope you enjoy the chat with Helge, and we'll see you next time on the Short Wheelbase Podcast.
Helge, thank you for taking some time to chat with me today. I really appreciate it.
Oh, no problem.
I want to find out how you were introduced to motorcycles as a youngster, or when you were living in Norway. I've visited with a lot of people doing these interviews over the past year or so, and everybody seems to have an interesting story or experience that got them involved or interested in motorcycling. What was there one for you?
Yeah, well, my father used to have a Norton when he grew up, and then he met my mom. And on that one, he had a floorboard or some. No, it was a floorboard of a car that he crashed into and broke his ankle. And that was kind of the short story of his motorcycle career. So he didn't mind me at all getting into motorcycling, but obviously my mom had the opposite feelings about it. So when I got my first little Vespa scooter, there was a moped with a gear shifter, on the hand. It was like 3 gears.
Yep.
Shift after clutch. And I remember I was so embarrassed because I had to wear a helmet. And that was my hippie days. I'm born in 55, so this is in the early 70s. I'm getting a bike. End of 60s, early 70s, and I remember I drove from home, I drove around the corner, and I had a rock where I put the helmet, and then I could take off and left all my curly hair out. So I got my first little scooter, and then my friend, that was kind of my mentor, and I looked up to always. All of a sudden, he ended up with an R90S, and it was like, oh, my gosh. I know I never can afford or get close to that, but that was such a cool bike. And then he helped me I got the Russian bike, a Ish 49, which had a gear shifter on the tank. It was a 2-stroke. The passenger will sit a little higher behind you on the springy seat. Then I got the Suzuki TT500, very long wheelbase, 2-stroke again. 2-cylinder deal, and it was during a trip down to Italy, and I had many stories about that, one burning a hole in one piston and stuff going on the Autobahn. But my point with the story is I came down to Italy, and I were at a motorcycle rally there, and here comes my friend from Oslo, another guy, and he said, Helge, you need to go back, buy the next one, because he came on the first R80 GS. This was 1981. There were 2 imported to Norway, and I was like, I need to get one of them. And that time, by the way, I jumped a little too fast there. I had the R100/7 that I was riding on at that time. And he said, you need to get the R80 GS. And he was like, wow, I never knew that they were even coming out with a bike like that. And that's how I ended up with my bike that I took around the world.
Let's back up a second there. You mentioned the R100/7, and you had sent me a few pictures of that, which were really neat, the black and white photos. And that was that was in the mid 70s sometime, 77, 78 or something.
Yeah, that was a 77 model, and I had that till 1980, I think, when I crashed that. And then after that, I got the R80 GS.
Spare tubes? Yep, got them. Spare starter relay and clutch cable? Check-a-rooney. These are just some of the things on your checklist you may have when preparing for a road trip on your 247. Two things you may not have considered: the BMW MOA Anonymous book and the MOA's Roadside Assistance Plan. No matter how well you and your bike are prepared, the unexpected can happen. The BMW MOA Anonymous book, it's one of the most confidence-inspiring items I pack when traveling. It's full of contact information for MOA members across the U.S. and internationally who can offer assistance in the event of a breakdown or provide a tip on where to grab a good sandwich or catch a live band. I've used the Anonymous book on a few occasions over the years. The result, always the same: friendly assistance with the repair and a great story to tell down the road. Conversely, I've hosted and assisted fellow riders over the years, and the same applies. Always a fun story and the feeling of satisfaction when helping someone in need. Now, roadside assistance plans. These start at $20 a year for the basic and top out at just over $60 a year for the Platinum Roadside and Tire Hazard Protection Plan. That includes 100 miles of free towing up to 4 times a year and 2 tire replacements each year, up to $250 for each tire. The Platinum package covers up to 3 bikes, regardless of the brand or year. As with any offer, there are details and conditions here, so be sure to check out more on this on the BMW Motorcycle Owners of America website under the Resources tab. So next time you've got a long road trip planned, yes, pack your spares and make sure your bike is tuned and ready to go. And for that extra peace of mind, have your MOA Anonymous book and Roadside Assistance Plan ready as well. So you were starting to get your travel, your wanderlust and your travel legs on with the /7.
Oh, yeah. I lived in northern Norway, and for those that are here in North America and trip up to Prudhoe Bay is kind of an expedition in itself. Well, I lived up at 70 degrees north, and I worked for the rescue helicopter service as a photographer in Norway. And that's when I never had a car up till then. And I had a snowmobile in the winter, and I had my R100/7 for the summertime. So up there you have midnight sun for 2 months. If you want to go for a ride 1 o'clock in the morning, well, the sun is still in your face. So it was a beautiful thing to do, and I rode down to Kristiansand in Norway, and then I rode down to Europe in the vacations and stuff. So I got to ride a lot, but you get sun in the summer, but then you also don't see the sun for 2 months in the winter. Mm-hmm. And that's when I did the same thing that my good friend at home in Kristiansand in the south, he had done with his R90S. He had polished the engine block and the shaft drive housing on the back. So I did the same with my R100/7, and I made it into an S. I got the S fairing. But as you saw in the pictures, and it looks like chrome on the engine block. And that was all hand-sanded. You couldn't use any machinery because it would cut too fast. I'm not good at this, but my friends told me, just use your hands. And I had 2 months with no sun or what else to do there.
Yeah.
So much TV, fortunately. So, but anyway, it ended up being a really beautiful bike. And then one day I picked up hitchhiker. Well, he had broken down with a motorcycle. I was on the way to the BMW rally in Norway. I was one of many. We started a BMW club there many years ago. So I was on the way there, and I met this guy broken down from Denmark with a Moto Guzzi, and they have the same alternator as the BMW.
That's
so
right.
He tried to fix it all night, and he jumped on the back of my bike, and we drove, and I got the big puncture on the front tire, and we flew through the air, and bike ended up in a potato field, planted the wheels in the potato field, almost no harm to the bike. And we were okay, got it up, and went up to the rally. And after that, I sold it for R80 GS.
Wow. Wow. What a story. Boxer 2 Valve delivers a world-class learning experience with William Plam in their downloadable video series. Get tips and tricks from William's 40-plus years of motorcycle experience in a format you own. Commercial-free, with access anywhere, anytime. Each video contains content that's applicable to mechanics of any level, whether you're just starting out or have some experience with the spanners. You'll be able to take away some valuable information to assist you in your project. I know I've mentioned this before, but when I reconditioned my R90S a few years back, I had these videos on my laptop on the workbench. I watched each service sequence before digging into the job. These videos gave me the confidence and assistance I needed to get the 90S back into shape and back on the road. You can find the full listing of downloadable videos for purchase at boxer2valve.com. That's the number 2, boxer2valve.com. So yes, let's talk about the GS. So you mentioned you were made aware of the introduction of that motorcycle. I guess that was right around the year it was coming out, the 81 or 82, is that right?
Yeah, well, it was introduced, if you look in the history book, in September in France.
In 1980, I think. Yeah.
1980, correct. So, but it was not available for sale for the common people like us in Norway and other places till 1981. So, and I think it also just came with a kickstart in the beginning, and they found out
that's right.
It's too hard to kickstart it, so you need to put the electric starter on too. So 2 of them were imported to Norway, and I bought the second one there.
Wow.
And it was a big chunk of money for us, because in Norway we had almost 200% import tax on luxury vehicle, which that was considered. So it was a big lift, but it was a fantastic opportunity, because I was wondering what bike. I always decided to go to Africa on a motorcycle tour, and here it all came together.
So what were your initial impressions when you got the bike, and what, I'm curious, what did you sort of change, modify, or alter in short order, or during the first maybe year or so of your tenure of ownership to get it kind of set up how you wanted it?
Well, it started that I bought it with the intention of going to Africa the following year. So I had quit my job. My contract was up. I didn't want to renew it, so I went to southern Norway. I had that bike then, and together with my good friend that I keep referring to, Pelle, we worked on the bike. And it was kind of funny. He just got married, had his first kid, and I was helping him with the foundation of his house, literally. I was camped with my tent there and the bike. So one day we were doing cement work and hard labor, building up the foundation and starting on his home. In the evening, or when we had time in between, we were welding the subframe of the bike, because he wanted to make it stronger. He's a very, very, very smart engineer. He was working on the early days on the engineering of the platforms in the North Sea for the oil drilling. So think about it. This is 1981, and he was putting into his CAD program or whatever it was called, and you say, okay, we're going to imitate that your R80 is flying 5 meters up in the air and landing, and these boxes we are putting on here, we're going to have some shock absorber there, and this bolt, 10-millimeter bolt, is going to be the first that break, because in a system you always have to have a fuse, and that's going to be your fuse. So
Yeah.
you don't break the whole frame and all of that. And you mentioned the other day you were going someplace to straighten a frame.
That's right, yeah.
Yeah, that's not easy, huh?
No. As a matter of fact, just as a side note, it was a pretty big process. Now, the nice thing about that was they were able to do it, mostly with the bike intact. The engine didn't have to come out, and really just the front end was removed, which wasn't a whole lot of work, but there's a little bit involved there. Then they have sort of what looks like a medieval torture device, a jig that they put the bike in, some hydraulic arms, and in this case, the bike had a hard pull to the right, so they ended up heating the down tube up on the right side, getting it glow red, and then using the hydraulic arms to sort of push everything back into alignment, into a center plane. And the guys have been doing this for 20 years, and they just did a fantastic job, and were even able to sort of paint the frame where they had heated it. They've done this enough. They just did a great job touching it up. And as a matter of fact, Helge, I rode it for the first time today since the repair. Yes, and it's night and day. I mean, they just did a wonderful job. And just say this, parenthetically, for anybody who has an accident like that, or if you find a motorcycle that's been accident damaged but is not too terribly bad, it can be done and quite effectively. Yeah.
Yeah, I heard that most people you hear that do these things, they just go and buy a new frame and kind of like, no, that's a write-off, that's too hard and stuff. So that's good to know that somebody actually know their trade, huh?
Yeah, that's pretty amazing. Pretty amazing. I mean, it was about $1,000 for the job, which, I guess if you're, and this was on a 77 S, so that's a one year model only bike. It's kind of unique in the BMW lineup, so I thought it was worth the time and effort to save it and keep the frame and engine numbers matching it and all those kind of things. But Air Support BMW is a dedicated shop for air-cooled BMW motorcycles, offering high-end restorations and engine blueprinting for all models from World War II through 1995. Air Support offers expert mail-order component repair for transmissions, final drives, carbs, anything you can ship, they'll fix it. Air Support uses BMW OEM parts, factory tools, and brings years of experience to each job. And don't worry about shipping to Canada. Shipping rates are affordable and on par with other options. You can follow shop happenings, repairs, bike builds, all of George Thomas's racing exploits on Instagram as well. To schedule your next repair or to find out how George Thomas can help keep your 247 in good order, drop a line or give him a call. It's all there for you at airsupportbmw.com. I want to get back to that story you were alluding to there. So you were identifying potential weak points on the GS.
Yeah, because, again, whoever listened to this, you have to put yourself back to 1981. You might even not been born at that time. So there was no internet. All information we got was magazines. And I got a friend that studied down in Germany. He came back with Motorrad magazine, and we had some Scandinavian magazines. So we saw people, how they did, and world travelers. And one of the world travelers I saw was Paul Pratt, and he wrote a book called World Understanding on Two Wheels. And then I saw other articles and stuff. So I said, I need some of these aluminum boxes. They really look good. So I got the boat builder to build the boxes, and they were anodized aluminum. And then my friend, Pelle, he made the mounting system. And what I just said was he put in these 3 bolts that was anchored to the bike. So 2 in the front, 1 in the upper rear, and then you had a tube that connected them on the lower end. And during my travels, I always traveled with extra fuses, which in this case was these 10 millimeter bolts. You can get them all over the world, but I always had some. I probably broke them 5 or 6 times. When I went down hard, it broke, and my pannier came off. Big deal. Well, I just have to sit there, get out the stuff that was left in there, and put in the new balls. Took a few hours, perhaps. And so what? I didn't have a bent, out of shape, impossible to ride bike, so that was the fuse. So that was very important. I also ordered through my friend that got my Motorrad magazine. He also came home with a Heinrich tank. And that was a steel tank that was 40 liters, so that's just over 10 gallons. And so that all of a sudden changed the whole configuration of the bike. And it was probably not intended to be like that, but I was going to go through the Sahara Desert, which was my first big hurdle. And I never ridden on sand ever. I mean, we didn't have sand in Norway. There's a few beaches that have a little sand.
Yeah.
So when I came down to Morocco, I started practicing and got stuck. And, I've been reading. There was no YouTube again in that time. So I've been reading about taking out air of the tire and practice. And I also had 2 jerry cans, 2 5-gallon, so 20 liters in each, about 5 gallon each. And on each side, one for water and one for petrol to get through the desert. So it was a heavy beast.
Yeah, no kidding.
So that was the main improvements or changes, I should say.
Yeah, and now you probably didn't think much about this back then, but you were driving a first-year brand-new model motorcycle. I mean, those bikes were really well tested. I mean, anybody who's done a little bit of history and research on those. I mean, BMW did their R&D on those bikes, and they didn't come out of the chute hoping for the best, obviously, but still, that was a first-year brand-new model. There were still going to be kinks to be worked out as any new model bike. I own one too. I own a 1981 model. I've had it for about 7 or 8 years. Yeah, sure enough. And I know a lot of the things that I've upgraded and changed on it. I've, service bulletins I've seen for the motorcycle, and things I've had to do over the tenure of my ownership. I'm curious. There was, I'm sure, voluminous and many issues, repairs, and things that needed fixed. What did you notice, first off, as some of the shortcomings on the bike, on the GS during your sort of 10 years on 2 wheels? There had to have been some issues that either kept coming up, or maybe you just thought, geez, they could have thought about this a little bit better.
Well, yeah, you're very right about this. A big chance to take on the first year. And many of them I can't really blame BMW for either, because, they had their panniers. They're kind of like closer plastic pannier kind of deal in the beginning. And it was like limit 10 kilo, 22 pounds in each, things like that. And here I come and I put these big aluminum boxes on, weighs a ton with jerry cans full of fuel and a 40-liter 10-gallon tank in the front, So the bike was abused from the first day I took off and had it on South Africa.
Yeah, and we all know
what I'm telling you further, please keep that in mind.
Yeah, that's right. And the subframe on that particular model, in fact, throughout the whole model run, was really thick or really weak, and the welds, kind of left a little bit to be desired. I mean, I've had my subframe repaired just from using standard panniers on my motorcycle over the years. So, yeah. Okay.
Well, that's the first thing Helge did when he did that mounting and that flying at 5 meters through the air and stuff. And it was totally reinforced, the subframe.
Yeah.
So it was a lot of work put into that, and that kept really good. What broke first was, and it was kind of scary, I came down to Tamanrasset in Algeria, and I was going to head out by myself, and I might as well just have had a sandpaper as a map heading into the desert with a compass. There were no GPS at that time. I didn't have any, I just knew people said, follow those tracks there, and there was some barrels here and there. And I didn't come long before I broke the rear suspension.
Oh.
So I were able to make me back into the oasis of Tamanrasset, and there, together with some people and a welder, I put on a Peugeot shock absorber as the damper, because the damper had gone in the shock absorber, and I still had the spring. So I kept the spring and the original damper, and then the Peugeot was the damper. So I continued like that. We welded on the arm. It was very primitively done. Later it will break again, but that was the learning curve. So eventually I ended up with a pretty good setup as a double monoshock, so two parallel shock absorber on the right side there doing the job. And that worked for a long time. And next time I had a serious thing was a year later in Malawi. I've been working in a safari for 5 months in Kasongo National Park, and I was saying goodbye. I drove through the park and saying goodbye to the elephants on the right side and left side, literally, and came out of the park. And here, all of a sudden, the bike just collapsed, and I end up in the ditch, and I have no clue what's going on. And my front fork broke, and it broke just under the triple clamp. So that's something I saw later. They went from 38, I think, to 42 millimeters, something like that. They went up in dimension when the R100 came out. And I broke that same fork. I got the new fork leg. It took 1.5 months before it came down to Africa. That's another long story. And then the same fork leg broke on the way up to the most northern point, Cape Agulhas in Australia. And that was, I was taking the old Telegraph Road. For those that are familiar with that, it's a really, really hard ride. But I broke the fork there. I met a really smart farmer. He said, well, it's broken below the triple clamp. So you have the triple clamp, and then you have the upper triple clamp,
right,
if you will.
Yep.
So he said, we are going to cut that piece upper there. We're going to put the weld inside the triple clamp, which will make it strong enough for you to go down to Cairns and get yourself a new fork. And then we just make both of the forks shorter. So I'm riding with it really low fork, but I was able to get down to Cairns. So there's always a way around these things. But the forks and the shock absorbers were probably the weakest point.
Wow, that's interesting to note. Is it safe to say that had something to do maybe with the weight of the bike, or do you think they were just sort of the construction quality was poor? I mean, what was your thoughts on that?
No, like I said just previously, I said, please blame me on this for overloading this bike, because BMW probably didn't think and that people were going to put a 40-liter tank and jerry cans, big panniers. So I totally blame this on myself. Then again, fast forward to 1996, after the 10 years on two wheels, I did an additional tour, and that was not with that same bike, but it was the R100 GS, together with Andy Goldfein, the founder and owner of Aerostitch Riderwear up in Duluth. So we rode together for 5 months, and we had 2 R100 GSs. We found out a little later, just a few hundred numbers, or if it was even that, in serial production apart. And both of them, within 1 week, we had the canister for the electronic ignition. Inside, there's a little centrifugal device that changed the opening for, and it's no longer a spark, it's a magnetic kind of a deal. But my point was, the 2 pop riveted thing, they came loose, and when they came out of alignment, all of a sudden that thing catch, and it just disintegrated. And so we were sitting there with good help for a million mosquitoes in the middle of Siberia with super glued and JB Weld. And it was like forensic work. We put out white toilet paper, took all the parts, put them together, and glued all of this together. It took a whole day.
Wow.
We got that bike up and running. 1 week later, I think it was 6 days later, that happened to his bike also, or it was the other way around. His was first and then mine. And that we blamed on the pop riveting. So that was, I think that one guilt on the BMW.
Wow, uncanny that those happened. The serial numbers were so close, and then those breakdowns happened like that at the same time. I think you kind of answered the next question I was going to ask you. Here is if you could go back and make some changes and improvements on that first R80 GS that you had. It sounds like it probably would have been suspension upgrades right out of the gate.
And that's for all of the BMWs. I wrote an article for Cycle World many years ago, and I called "Shame on You, BMW." And that was if there's anything I carry on a trip, it is shock absorbers. And if there's any advice I give for whatever bike it is, from old to new to the newest, is upgrade to aftermarket shock. I think it's a shame that you buy a bike that you cannot change the fluid in a reservoir where you get more abuse than anywhere else. Can you imagine the piston inside a shock absorber, how many thousands or times that go up and down and how hot that gets at the time? And there's no opportunity to change the seals or the liquid. They're not serviceable. And I remember Peter Duval, when he was the head of the BMW, wonderful South African guy. He was boss in BMW MOA USA. And we sat and had lunch and talked about it. And I said, I should think you guys should be all on top of this and get something that you can overhaul, because then you get customer in and they get service, and they have to do service, and that's where you make your money, and everybody will be happy. Today I have a Touratech tractive suspension on my bike, and every so often, usually between 25 and 30,000 miles, I take it off, I send it in, and they change the seal and the liquid, and I have never problems with this shock absorber. While my clients, and I have the opportunity to see it in all kind of brands, but mostly we get GSs, BMW. Weakness is in the shock absorbers. The only time it's gotten better now is because of the electronics, because in the beginning, nobody know how to set up a shock absorber. It's an art in itself. If you go on the racetrack, they have engineers that are dedicated to set up the shocks on the superbikes. So who can expect that us amateurs out there in the field know what to do? But now you have electronics that are working it to your advantage, so we don't see as many problems as we used to, but still it's a weakness.
Yeah. Boy, you bring up a great point. I mean, in all the Airheads I've owned, the 80 GS I have now, and I have a couple other /7s and a R90S myself, but that's really one of the first sort of modifications or things I'm looking to upgrade or make sure that it's still working right is the suspension. I mean, they're out of the box. You're right. They don't always seem that they've been up to the task, so to speak. All right, Helge. So anything else to add on that, by the way, as far as, I mean, I kind of fed you the answer there. You would have had better suspension on your GS back then on that initial trip. Anything else?
No, I think suspension is was a big one on that. And, in all fairness, too, we do load up these bikes, but look at the other way. BMW know that, and that's they show people like myself and other world traveler and saying, hey, look what they are doing. Well, then you should also live up to that reputation that we carry the kitchen sink and then some. So, yeah, it is a big part.
Yeah, it's a head scratcher. I don't know why either. I mean, and you bring up a great point. I mean, that just, maybe you were making too much sense when you said provide the customer a good serviceable shock and it'll be a serviceable item, just like everything else on the motorcycle is. But who knows?
Yeah, no kidding.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Okay, so I want to refer to something I mentioned earlier. I recall seeing some great Globe Rider videos on Amazon, and I guess some of those might still be there for folks to watch. But the reason I bring that up is on one of them, I remember seeing, and I may be off here, but somebody took an Airhead on one of the Globe Rider trips. I want to say maybe it was a 92 Paris-Dakar, a red and white one. Am I remembering that correctly?
Yeah, we have had several. So, one of them, I think that might be Laura Sievers. So a female rider, good friend and good rider. She had one PD. There has been many, but there were several up through the years.
And how, in your experience, how did they perform? I mean, a lot of that obviously has to do with, you mentioned how good the rider is. We're talking maybe 10, 15 years ago when that was still a reasonable bike, a valid bike to take on something like that. Were they still performing well, and were you able to find parts? I'm just curious, what was it like traveling on an Airhead on some of those longer journeys?
Well, I just had one person that she has Airhead, and I advised against her to take it because she also had a 1200 GSA 2016 model that she's taking on this tour. And when it comes to the technology and what we do, I see that we have more problems with the older bike than we have the newer bikes.
Sure.
With that said, that it's easier to fix the Airhead. When Andy and me did over 5 months tour and by all means we were in China, he burnt up his valves, and it didn't take more than a day or so. We had the new valves made locally, and you could take it apart. And when we had problems, whatever it has been, I've always been able to fix it. A couple of times with the more modern bikes, we had to shift them because we couldn't fix it. So, but when I look at overall, I have most modern bikes. That when I say that, I qualified with ESA bike. It has fuel injection. It has all the electronics and stuff. They're really solid these days. And what I see when we ride long distances, the weakness with the Airheads are usually electronics, like the charging system go off. So I rode across Siberia with a guy. We bought a car battery and a charger. So every night he charged off his battery overnight, and he had it on the seat in the back, hooked up to his own battery, and we made a switch for his lights so he can turn off all the lights. And every time, and I rode in front of him, and every time there was a police or something, because in eastern Siberia, the police didn't like that we ride, and they want to give us a fine for riding with lights on.
Oh.
When we come to Western, closer to Europe, it was the opposite.
Right.
So if we didn't have lights on, give us a fine. So, but I was riding in front, and when I start flashing my brake lights, then he turned on his light because he knew that something was coming up ahead. So we got the whole way through that way, and there's always a way around all of this. But, I would say for the tours that I do know, I'm really happy with the newer bike, the new technology. I listen when you talk to Elspeth, and I understand, I don't know you from before, but I know you are fanatic Airhead. And I was thinking, we are going to have a little discussion about newer technology. Because I really take to technology. And during the pandemic, I bought 2 crashed bikes from on a tour, and I built up bikes and built one bike out of 2 bikes.
Yeah.
And then the pandemic came. I had this skeleton, perfect, good frame and stuff, but the engine was busted. So I gave myself $5,000 I could spend on eBay, and I did a spreadsheet to see if it was possible. And I said, yeah, I can do that. And I wanted to learn how these new modern bikes work. It's a 1200 GS 2014 liquid cool bike. So lots of electronics. And I got the Haynes manual and YouTube, and I had nothing but time, and I wanted to learn. And I had another bike next to it, so I could go over and copy and see there. So I had all the advantages plus time. So I ended up from the frame, naked frame, build it up with new harness, electric harness and stuff, put it all together, couldn't get it, had to take it apart because I forgot one wire and it had to go a specific way. So it's not very forgiving like you would have on an Airhead, and not easy to work on. But it's a lot of, power in knowledge.
Yes.
So when you learn something, the confidence, and you're out on the road, it's a really good feeling to know that, yeah, I might not be able to take the engine apart, but I understand more of what's going on. And that was what I achieved. And we were out on the road now in Africa, and a guy blew up the rear drive, and I knew exactly what was going on and could assist with that. So I think that's what it really comes down to. It doesn't matter what bike you have. There are weaknesses, there are plus and minuses with everything. If you educate yourself and you like it, I like technology, and I take to it and go with it. I don't say I'm good at it, but I get around with it. It's fun.
Air Support BMW is a dedicated shop for air-cooled BMW motorcycles, offering high-end restorations and engine blueprinting for all models from World War II through 1995. Air Support offers expert mail-order component repair for transmissions, final drives, carbs, anything you can ship, they'll fix it. Air Support uses BMW OEM parts, factory tools, and brings years of experience to each job. And don't worry about shipping to Canada. Shipping rates are affordable and on par with other options. You can follow shop happenings, repairs, bike builds, all of George Thomas's racing exploits on Instagram as well. To schedule your next repair or to find out how George Thomas can help keep your 247 in good order, drop a line or give him a call. It's all there for you at airsupportbmw.com. Before we go on to the next topic, I want to mention something about new technology versus old technology. Are you familiar with Daniel Rintz?
Well, I heard that name. Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
I heard it.
Yep. So he did I think over a 4 or 5 year period, I can't remember, two different phases, circumnavigation, and the thing I want to point out is for the second part, his wife had I think a Paralever GS from like 1990, and I think he had a newer R1200 or 1250. Anyway, the point is, the newer bike had less downtime, less days broken down. It was more cost-effective to run, and overall, it performed much better than the older GS. Now, of course, we should say the older GS, they didn't. When they built that, when they bought the bike and did the trip on it, they weren't doing a whole lot of pre-ride preparation. So, for instance, they might not have gone through and replaced a diode board or put in a new electronic ignition system or things like that. I think they just sort of wrote it as it was and fixed it as they went along. But it bears the point you were saying there is that even though the newer technology can be a bit daunting, to guys like me especially, I just don't live near a dealer, anywhere near a dealer here in Arkansas, so I've avoided newer bikes for that reason. But the newer models, is in his case as well, turned out to be the more reliable machine, which some people find hard to believe at times.
Well, I think the best people to talk to is people like myself, people that do big tours with a group, because we get everything. Like on this one, I have one Yamaha T700, two KTM 790, and the rest are 1200 or 1250 GSs. And you get to see, and that's very normal on the bike. In Africa, we had one Harley Pan American, and then the rest was BMWs.
How'd the Harley do?
Terrible.
Did it really?
Yeah, seriously. And, not to just put on Harley and stuff, it's the first generation, but when I saw them coming off first the road, it looked uglier than, and I didn't like I like aesthetics. I'm a photographer. I like aesthetics.
Yeah.
And everybody said, it's going to be better when you look at it live. But it was getting all these rave reviews, and I was like, good for Harley, that's great. The competition is great. The diversity is great. And this guy came with it. He had many BMWs, and I've known him for a long time. And he had nothing but electronic problems. He actually, right out of the bat, 2 days into the trip, he had to go back to near Cape Town. For 2 days, they swapped parts with the shop, Pan American, and tried. They never could fix it. So he was driving with it without the electronics, kind of. It was not perfect ever on the whole trip.
Wow.
But that was definitely electronics and problems with that. And I've had electronic problems on my bike too.
Sure.
That 12 that were up in Tibet and in the Himalayas. And all of a sudden it started to go really rusty. And long story short, there was a little rock that must have hit it's a sensor under the left cylinder that senses the cam position. I had no clue it existed even. I didn't know when I had the problem either. So this is a week later I find out that's where it comes from. But it took a long time to diagnose that. And that's when I was convinced that I need to travel with, you might have heard about it, the GS 911.
Yes,
it's an electronic device. No, I swear I never leave home without it. I use it at home. I always have it with me. It's a great tool to diagnose problems. But it's not going to solve the problem. But you are halfway there if you know what's wrong. If you don't know what's wrong, you start, changing air in your tire, changing gas. You do everything stupid to try and come to the problem. But if you've broken an arm, well, you've broken an arm. But if you don't know what it is, that's half the battle.
Yeah, that's a great point. Well, look, Helge, thank you for being so generous with your time today. I've really enjoyed the conversation. I've wanted to speak with you for a long time. I've admired you from afar and everything you've done. You've been a great motivator for motorcyclists just to, get out and ride and enjoy life. And many miles, fun miles ahead for you, my friend.
Thank you. And everybody that listened to it, if I can give you one advice, the best currency you can take with you on the tour is time. Don't rush it. Just enjoy it. So it was good talking to you, Darren, and I appreciate the opportunity. Thank you.
Thanks for joining us on the Short Wheelbase Podcast, presented by the BMW Motorcycle Owners of America. To join the club, visit bmwmoa.org. You can find full-length episodes of the excerpts heard here on the Airhead 247 podcast. The Short Wheelbase Podcast is produced and edited by Nick Malozzi. Audio segments by Jeff Glover. You can check in with Nick at Airhead Misfits on Instagram.